We're on air. Good part of day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you to everyone who joined today. Our virtual event. This is Large Scale Scrum of New York City, the biggest, the fastest growing, and a very active community. Thank you all for being members of it. Today we have our important guest in the studio, Diana Larsen. This is her second appearance here. She's coming back after a few weeks ago. She did a great presentation, which was posted online. Without any further ado, so just to serve justice, Diana Larsen is the co-founder and chief connector and very well-known person in the space of coaching, consultancy, and mentorship. Her affiliation, her company is Agile Fluency Project. She co-authored many books and has been a great presenter and facilitator at various events. I will probably mention one thing that she tends to forget, and I will shamelessly do it. There is something that's coming up on August 13. She is kicking off an Agile Fluency workshop, which will effectively make whoever comes will become a licensed facilitator. It is geared towards Eastern US time zone. There will be some others in Europe in September, in English and in German. So everything can be found on her website, agilefluency.org. And when we post the video, we will also have this information available from Diana. Now, this event is meant to be mostly an interactive session, Q&A, and like open discussion, more than a presentation. So with a raise of hands, could you please, and I'm assuming that many people have either attended Diana's previous talk or are just familiar with the subject and have some pressing questions. So with a raise of hands, could you please reply yes with a raise of hand if you already have some good questions to ask, so we don't have to do a replay of what Diana described last time. If there were no hands, we will assume that we need a bit of a replay, and Diana will spend another maybe 5-7 minutes replaying her previous discussion. So hands up, meaning you got questions ready to fire. Questions, no hands, meaning that you need some refresher. Diana, I think people are either overly shy or just want a refresher, so we're just not doing that.
All right. No, I'll mind. I don't mind doing that at all. So let's, but you have to share your, I have to be able to.
Yeah, let me see. I can do it without losing. So recording is on, so I'll give you make host. Yes. Okay. So recording is still running. Okay, so you should be able to share now.
Okay, so here we go. So the talk that I did on May 12th, and the full recording of it, I think is up on the Less New York City website, or it's available there somewhere. And I've given it a couple of different versions of it some other places. So if you just search on this title, you can probably find it. Let's see there. So it was really about the idea of, when we are in this pandemic time, all of a sudden we're faced with constraints and trade-offs and limits that we may not have seen before, or it may have helped us understand limits that have always been there, but that we weren't paying attention to or unaware of. And the idea being that some of those limits can be helpful and we want to nurture them. And we tend to think of limits as just being a bad thing. But it's not really. It can, like anything, it's got two sides, and it can be helpful. So so I kind of went through a bit here about defining what all those terms in the title mean. And we talked a bit about that I work primarily with software folks, but any kind of knowledge work is creative work these days. It's not just the accumulation of knowledge, it is actually creating new knowledge, and particularly software work is that. And so these these quotations are very relevant to any kind of creative work. And I won't tell the story about my mom. Um, this is the work that I'm going to be talking about here is work that I've done together with James Shore. He and I were the co-creators of the Agile Fluency model. And I'm going to be had used that as a frame for thinking about different kinds of limits that teams face as we go through doing our work. Told a story about a time when I worked with a public utility, and the upshot of the story was that group of folks ended up with some very effective focusing zone teams in the Agile Fluency terminology, and they were very happy with those teams for very long. I did hear from somebody once, but about moving some of the teams into delivering zone, but I think they're still just happy having good, solid, highly performing focusing teams. So we talked about why people like focusing teams, why this particular organization found value in them. All of these bits were things that they were not getting before and that were hugely valuable to them. And so, you know, they were very happy with that shift. And there are investments that need to be made in order to make that shift. And in that zone, there are certain kinds of limits that we look for. We start introducing things like WIP limits. When people are working in teams and not necessarily as individual contributors, things like working agreements become much more important that you know, put some constraints, some limits on people. Can't just behave however they want. They have to behave in accordance to the what the team has decided is going to be most helpful to them. We talk about limits to story size. We talk about limits to team size and how those things can be helpful. So all of those things are the kind of limits that we think about when we're thinking about focusing teams. And the idea is that when we get clear about the limits that are impeding us and the limits that can be helpful to us, it helps us kind of stay reality based. We don't fall into wishful thinking like anything is possible. There are no limits. No, there are, and sometimes there need to be. So beyond focusing teams, some organizations don't find that they get enough value from focusing teams, and they look at moving toward more delivering teams, delivering zone teams. The value here is that you're looking more at the need to do rapid, regular delivery to a customer base, and you can't afford the kinds of defects and other post delivery fixes that you might be able to do with some of the work that's done in focusing zone teams. So delivering teams get these kinds of benefits, and so we look for those, and they require some investments. They take a little bit longer to develop really high functioning delivering zone teams, and much more attention to even more attention to engineering skills than maybe you needed to have in the and new engineering skills, like making sure you're regularly doing TDD and continuous integration and those kinds of things. So limits that are helpful for these teams are things like coding standards, you know, shared understanding. If we're all integrating into the same code base, we need to be, you know, have some agreements about that. If in these days when teams like this are working a lot remotely, we need a limit about, you know, how do we handle our team meetings. We might want to limit the amount of product backlog that is visible to the team, just to help to manage the cognitive load, because there's so much cognitive load these days. So, and then we had some discussion about what other things there might be. A third zone that we're going to talk about today is the optimizing zone. When you know, when teams have, when an organization has a product that they've already put in the marketplace, and they they need to maintain it, add new feature sets to it, delivering zone can be really perfect. But if we're talking about creating brand new things that haven't existed in the world before, brand new products that we hope are going to cause innovation in the marketplace, or even disruption, you know, creating whole new product line ideas, then those organizations may want optimizing teams, and that optimizing teams require some structural change. We're going to have to move to really true cross-functional teams. It's not a matter of just having the technical part of the team be cross-functional, but now we need to add in business understanding and so on into the teams. So the value here is, you know, better competitiveness. There's no handoffs because all the decision makers are in the team. So you get better alignment with market needs and so on. The investments here are that you have to be patient. It takes even a little bit longer to gain mastery here, and it can be tricky to make those kinds of sweeping organizational changes, and difficult. So you need somebody, some sponsor for this change that is willing to spend their sort of internal social capital to make this happen. And then teams take on more responsibility for planning and budgets and so on. So some limits here is like budgetary limits, things like making sure that you've comprised the team correctly, that you don't have an overabundance of one skill set but not enough of another skill set. You need the really best balance of that in the team. And the team, because they're now making these bigger product decisions, they need to be able to report understandable business metrics. So the team needs to learn to work with those metrics, and metrics, of course, always influence behavior. So this is the whole graphic of the thing that I've just been through very quickly with these zones. And this is available to you if you go to our website at agilefluency.org and go to the Contact Us form. You can request, and we will send you a PDF of this. Usually when I do a talk, or before March, when I do a talk, I hand out cards that have these on this graphic on them, but I can't do that anymore. And so we're making the PDF available to you, and we just ask that you honor the copyright on it. So, so if you want this, go to agilefluency.org, contact us, say, I'd like the graphic that Diana mentioned in this talk, and we'll send it to you. Okay, so when we think about the limits and versus the trade-offs, you know, the kind of trade-offs we need to think about in as we look through these zones really have to do with, you know, what are we willing to give up? What are the two things that seemingly are not attainable at the same time? How are we willing, what exchanges are we willing to make and that makes sense to us? What makes it worthwhile to do these kinds of things? And, you know, I think that first bullet at the very top, the comfort with habitual behavior, trading off what we've always done for needing to learn something new, is a big one. And it's one that we often get a lot of pushback on as Agile coaches. So when you're thinking about the trade-offs and the limits that are going to enable your work, you want to be thinking about it from a number of different perspectives. This is the graphic of the Agile Fluency Suite. The model is here. You can read about the model on our website. There's a free downloadable ebook. But some other parts that we work with and that our licensed facilitators work with is our Agile Fluency Diagnostic and our Agile Fluency Improvement Cycle, and all the materials that support both of those. And those together, I have found in my own work, are really powerful tools for talking to the folks that we may need to get permissions from, or we may need to get sponsorships from. They're really great tools for having a conversation, say with senior leaders, about what really are your expectations for these teams, and how can we best help you help those teams meet those expectations. And so that the work that we do as Agile practitioners in organizations aligns with what it is those senior leaders are trying to accomplish. And so now it's the time for more questions. Last time we got to this slide and there weren't a lot of there wasn't a lot of time left for questions. So now we're making sure that we've got a lot of time for questions, and that's that. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'll keep it in the background in case we need to refer back to any of that. But yes, I'd love to. What questions from those of you who saw it before? What questions have lingered for you since the last time? For those of you for whom that's new, or maybe you've done a little bit of research on the website and you have your own questions, happy to entertain any of those things.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick ask to everyone, folks. Please mute yourself unless you're explicitly asking, because we have quite a few people and there's a lot of background noise. So.
Oh, wow, we're up to 44 now. Oh.
Any question, either ask or drop in the chat room and I'll pick it up from there and present it to Diana.
Yeah.
The floor is open.
Yeah. And on this call, there is at least one other person. I'm kind of scanning through the names, and since a lot of you can't be on video, it's a little trickier to tell. But I know there's at least one other person who already is a licensed facilitator with the Agile Fluency project, and that is Jim York. And so if you'd like, independent verification of any of the answers that I get, we can get that from Jim as well. So thanks for coming, Jim. Okay.
There's one in the queue, so let me prime
okay.
the pump, Diana.
Okay, all right.
Do you find the teams initiate change in business, or that business should help drive business change?
I think it's a partnership. And, in the very, very early days of Agile, interestingly enough, the most popular methodology was extreme programming. And that was because that was a way that actual engineering teams could just start making the changes that improved their lives without needing any support from the rest of the organization until they got to a certain point. And so that was when we hear about the grassroots movement of Agile, it very often is stories from those days of the adoptions of XP just into the engineering teams. Now that we are talking about scaling Agile, we're talking about Scrum, which required more product management involvement in the teams, those kinds of things, you really need to start with a partnership of the organization. And in general, when I go into an organization to help them do some kind of adoption, I start with making sure that the senior leaders and middle managers are ready to support the efforts that the teams are going to make. Because I don't want to set the teams up for failure, to give them all the things that they need to do good work and then discover that the rest of the organization isn't going to allow it. That to me just feels like mean. I don't want to do that, right? It's just not the right thing to do. So these days, I do tend to work both, usually first with the senior leaders and managers, and begin to get them going in terms of how they need to think about how their work may change, and then begin the work with the teams, and recruit the other folks that we need to do that, because asking somebody to learn a new skill and then not giving them the environment in which they can actually use that skill is, that learning doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't mean anything. And so, so for me, that's really important, is that those things are on parallel paths with the leaders, the managers and leaders a little ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Diana. There's two more questions came in. I think people prefer to type them. So let me read this off.
Yeah.
Do you find that the optimizing teams need to be completely dedicated? I could see that some organizations would try to have a focusing team also work on optimizing type work. So I think you hope you
Yeah.
understand, right? If not, who's asking?
Yeah, so very often optimizing teams are like R&D teams. They're sort of like skunk works. So at some point they might reach out, you know, when they get their product to a certain uh, degree of development where they feel like it's really fully fleshed out, where they understand their customers and they're beginning to anticipate customer needs so that they can be innovative and disruptive and so on, they might enlist a focusing team or two to help with that. My guess is more likely they would enlist delivering zone teams, however. Um, Focusing zone teams are really good for prototyping, actually. I mean, an optimizing team might reach out, an optimizing zone team might reach out to focusing teams for some help with prototyping or something like that. But yeah, there's definitely can be team team collaboration across teams, right? Across zones. Yeah, for sure. There were a couple that were before you dropped the link in, Gene. One from
Hold on.
Jason Yip and one from Brian.
The fine teams initiate change.
Yeah.
No, that one we got. I think there were.
Do we get?
What are your thoughts of
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on thinking about these things as a way to assess capability versus as a way to guide improvement?
I see this as both. And that's why we actually developed our diagnostic, because we wanted to, every time we went into an organization before we had the diagnostic, the first question was, well, where are my teams now? How do I know what zone they're already performing in? And so we would go in and do our diagnostic, and that told us something about the capability of the whole team. We don't collect information about the capability of individuals, but it's the collection. It's what does the team have at its fingertips, its collective fingertips, that they can work with, that we need to understand. And so we either do use that diagnostic to figure out where the team is now, but then we work with the senior managers to know where do they think they need to be, where do they want them to be to accomplish for them to get the benefit from the team they're looking for, what are their expectations. And then the difference between where the team is now and the things they want to work on and where the leaders want them to be does guide those improvement efforts. We create an improvement plan out of that, and we say we're going to start here and we're going to work on these things first. And then after the organization has done some of that investment in the teams, giving them training they need, giving them other kinds of support they need, maybe give them, I mean, I can imagine if I had done a diagnostic survey of some teams very recently, I know a couple of organizations where the biggest outstanding thing would be these teams need to have the electronic tools that they can actually see each other. They cannot work on phones to do their work together, right? And so that would be a recommendation. And then the organization could make that investment to make sure that all the teams had the ability to, all team members had the ability to see their teammates, right? So you look for a few of those investments to be made, and usually that takes a little planning, it takes a little while. So somewhere down the road, say 6 to 9 months later, you can rerun the diagnostic, and then you see, is there been a change in capability in these teams as a result of the investments that we made? And generally speaking, we always see some improvements there, because and it's discernible. Now the teams are doing these things that they weren't able to do before, and they're getting these kinds of results that they weren't able to get before. And so then we can go back to those senior leaders and say, okay, so the next investments that we need to make are these, because this is going to get you further toward what you're looking for. And so it enables those conversations back and forth. And so we use the model and the diagnostic and the way we work the improvement cycle. We kind of use those all together as both a way to assess capability and as then a tool for saying, here's where we really want to invest. And rather than we're going to just buy this wholesale program and maybe we need some of it and maybe we don't, we can do some very targeted investment and improvement efforts that way. So that helped, Jason? He's off. Okay.
Good. We got two
All right.
questions in the queue, so I'll give them in the order of chronology.
Yeah.
How do you see is it A1 or L?
How do we see Al?
Yeah, I guess value stream management and DevSecOps affecting business progress in near future. I guess.
Yeah.
I want to anchor you to asking to it's AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
To clarifying, Brian.
Yeah, and machine learning and all those things. I'm not the best person to ask this question. I look at team behaviors and how teams are doing things. I think in optimizing teams and possibly delivering zone teams, we're going to be looking at some of the metrics or some of the techniques for understanding that we are going to be using might be value stream management. How do we get more smoothly between us and the customer? So we're looking for that. DevSecOps, that is a big question in the delivering zone. If people really want delivering zone fluency and the benefits of that, to what degree do we need to include DevOps folks, security folks, user interface folks, which maybe is the AI piece, could be or maybe not, and those kinds of things. To what extent do we need to include those folks as a part of the whole team that is building the ongoing feature sets of the product? Those are the kinds of things I think about and the analysis I do. I think the big question around AI and machine learning in the future is, to what degree are we taking into account the needs of many, many different kinds of users? And to what extent are we making sure that the things we're building are not going to be shutting people out? Disability accessibility, I mean, simple things like what we're learning about the way cameras work and how, I don't know, the one that's coming to mind is the story about the hand blowers, the hand dryers that don't see hands that are darker than a certain shade, right? And so those tools become unusable for a whole group of folks. Those kinds of things, I think we're going to have to pay a lot more attention to the ethics of AI and machine learning and those kinds of things than we have ever done in the past. And if we don't, we're going to leave a lot of people behind, and that's going to create a lot of social disruption, just like it is doing now in other arenas. So those are some of my thoughts about the future on those, although I am not a futurist. I enjoy hearing other people talk about that stuff, but that's not my area of study. So I'd point you to some other folks. Yes, the robot apocalypse may be on its way. Okay, what's next?
That's a good one. So the next one that we have two more. So the next one is team assessment. Do you also ask the team where they think which zone they should be, in addition to asking leadership what zone they want them to be in.
Yes. Generally, we do that at different places in the sequence. We start by asking the leaders, and then when we go in to do the assessment, whether we use our diagnostic tool or whether we assess in some other way using the thinking behind the model, we do it both ways. We will, after the team gives us where they are now, we reflect that back to them. And we say, is this where you think you need to be, right, to get the work done that you've been asked to do? And that can be a very interesting conversation. And then we say, well, here's what your leadership would like from you. And sometimes we worked with a group a year or so ago we went in to did a diagnostic with 8 teams. The leaders had told us that 7 of those teams they thought should be delivering zone teams, and one of those teams could be a focusing zone team. It would be really helpful if they were a focusing zone team. Well, when we did the diagnostic, that team that the senior leaders had said should be focusing zone, they were almost there. They were very close to there, and they were all eager to learn higher level engineering skills and so on. And so they were really disappointed that they didn't, that the leaders didn't believe that they also needed to be delivering zone team. So they went and advocated for themselves. And because they said, look, we're almost here, we can do so much more by doing this. So that does happen from time to time. I haven't as much seen it happen the other way, where the organization is asking them for more than the team wants to give. Mostly teams are delighted to know that these investments might be made in them and that they might be able to upgrade their skills in a lot of different ways. So
Hi, Dan.
hi.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'll be requesting for the license and I'll respect the copyright.
No, thank you.
Ask for a young team, what advice would you give a young team that is not on the enterprise level?
So say again what you mean by not, did you say not on the enterprise level or?
Yes, not.
Okay.
Young team, they're not large, they don't have multiple teams.
Oh, okay. So a young team in a small organization where there's maybe only one team. Okay. I would, for that one, I would look at what is the nature of the product that they are building. And I might sit with them and talk about the Agile Fluency model and the different zones of teams and say, given the kind of product that you're building, which of these zones do you think would be the best fit for you? And then, either do the diagnostic or just even talk through it using the model with that one team, and say, what zone do you think you're in now? Or what are you trying to stretch into right now? And is that going to be adequate for the product that you're trying to build over time? So I just make that a conversation to have with that group. I think it would be, particularly if they're fairly young developers, as well as being a team that's new together, I would expect that would be pretty eye-opening for them about what they can expect in the future of their work. Yeah.
The big question well, let me take in the order of priority. By the way, folks, kindly ask everyone, mute yourselves unless you're speaking. I don't have the privilege of muting. You do. Please mute yourself if you don't speak. Next question I had here was, during your initial diagnosis, when you have identified a gap, do you have a tool or a general guideline how to determine approximately how long the fundamental change will take? For example, how do you manage expectations?
Right. Well, so that's part of the reason that we on that graphic we talk about, from, if you want focusing zone teams, it's going to take from a dead start with, just not maybe having just come together as a team. It's probably going to take you 3 to 6 months to develop all the skills to really be masterful in that zone as a team. So we have some rough guidelines in that way. But then once we've done an assessment, whether we use the diagnostic or some other way, then we can say, okay, so you've already done this amount of stuff, right? And if you're looking at a delivering zone team, and that could take you anywhere, from maybe another 6 months to, another year, what are the things that we want to do first? And that's when we create the investment plan, so that we're beginning right away to check in. And then we have, I didn't really linger on that improvement cycle, but what the improvement cycle talks about is the feedback loops. That we go in, we work with the team, we get some improvement going, we either redo the diagnostic or we report back in some other way back to the leaders, and we say, okay, here's the progress we've made so far. Here are the next investments we think we should make. So it's iterative. We don't do this long-term projection. We do because we don't know how fast that team is going to learn and apply what they learn. How, what are they, fast learners? Are they slow learners? Are they eager to achieve team greatness? Or are they kind of wishy-washy about that? This is only a job. We don't really care. I mean, teams come in all kinds of flavors, right? So it depends so much. So we try to create investment plans that are maybe 3 months. This is in the next 3 months. This is what we're going to do. These are the investments we're going to make. These are the things the team's going to work on. These are the impediments that the leaders are going to remove from them, and the new enablements that they're going to provide. And we think over 3 months we'll get this kind of change, right? And then we can check to see about that, and then we iterate on that. We say, okay, well, so what does that tell? The way that went, what does that tell us about the next 3 months? And so we can do that, and we can do that in kind of some organizations, we do that in kind of a rolling basis. We're always looking 3 months out, but we start with that initial 3 months, and then after a month, we're looking 3 months out again, and so on and so forth. So, so it's iterative, like, everything else in Agile, it's iterative. And so we can't always predict when we will get to this one perfect state sometime in the future. But like anything else, the organization can always say, that's as much, that's the end of our trade-off. That's as much as we can afford. Thank you for the amount of improvement we've been able to get so far. We really can't afford any more improvement. But then they know how to manage their expectations about that. So that's how that works. I don't ever try to say, this will be done in 2 years, because we can't know that. I mean, what if I had made that projection in February this year? Oh, you'll be this fabulous co-located team in another year, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, we know kind of the extent of the validity of any projections that we make, right? We know that we can have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen over the next quarter. Not always perfect, but we have a better idea. And then once, then we can always be looking that far out. So that's the way I think about that.
That's a good one. Thank you, Diana.
Welcome.
So there was one more in the queue. Let me weave in one of my own, if you don't mind. I think it's someone was thinking privately something similar. Let me just summarize it. So in the context of the current situation we have on hand, COVID situation, people are remote, economics, distress, etc. What's your envision? Which organizations? What impact will it have on organizations with the initial organizational design and complexity being the factor? So if you take two organizations that are in the same type of business, more or less, give or take. One organization is very cumbersome, complex, bureaucratic, heavy, and the other is a leaner, simpler, smoother, from a
Yeah.
get-go. Like, I don't want to be anchoring
Yeah.
you too much and not
Yeah.
talk about
Right.
frameworks or ways of working, but
Yeah.
layman terminology here. So
Right.
what do you
Well,
think?
many years ago, I wrote a little blog post where I said, if an organization is dedicated to truly being a learning organization, investing in learning, and using those investments in learning toward discovering ways that they can iterate on their process, iterate on all of the, on their product lines, all that. I mean, it's very similar to the lean startup kind of thing, constantly sort of checking in. And that organization does retrospectives regularly for learning and improvement. They are probably going to be in better shape long term. And size adds an encumbrance to being able to do that. So it's not that large organizations can't do that. It's just that the number of the communication overhead just becomes so great. And so in large organizations, you have more opportunity for making that kind of change, the kind you were talking about, Jean. You have more opportunity to learn and improve if you chunk it down into smaller units. So, a certain kind of business unit might be able to take great strides before it hits the rest of the organization. I think, like I said when I was going through the slides, one of the most difficult challenges and trade-offs that any organization needs to make is moving out of their current habits, and their workarounds, the way they've always done things, all that kind of stuff, and shifting to actually creating new habits. That's one of the biggest challenges there is. People like staying in their comfort zone, and learning and then subsequent improvement never comes by staying in your comfort zone. So that is a paradox that all organizations need to manage, and organizations that have learned to manage that better are going to do better, in the in the general scheme of things. I think that's the corporate rebels out of the Netherlands that have been going around and looking at organizations that are much more flexible and nimble and better places to work in general for people. They're collecting a set of ideas about how to do that. And they have found a couple of big organizations that are doing that well. But in those instances, they are doing that well by starting in small parts of the organization, doing the learning they need that fits in their system, and then the speed to learning. How can they take that learning and distribute it across the rest of their organization as rapidly as possible? So those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about. Are we regularly, I mean, I don't care if you do a weekly or every other week retrospective or not, honestly. I think retrospectives are a really good tool for doing the kind of reflection and learning and making plans for improvement that will get us into a better future. And so I promote retrospectives, and I wrote the book because I think it's a good tool for doing that. But the most important thing is, are we doing that? Oh, thank you, Don. Are we doing regular reflection on how things are going? Are we doing regular opportunities to learn what that means to us? What are the implications of that? What do we need to know to overcome that situation? And then how are we going to set up the experiments or the next actions that will help move us to improvement? And so that's the key. Are we doing those kinds of things? And I think, one of the reasons that lean has been effective in the places it's been effective is you know, the improvement kata, and you know, they have many of those kinds of techniques and philosophies built in to that particular methodology. So that's one of its real strengths, is being able to do that. And of course, you know, Agile in one way and another has borrowed some and evolved others, but it kind of has been on the same path as that. And so uh, I'm going to stop talking about that now, but because I can kind of just keep going. But that's what I think is key. It's not the size of the organization; it's how they are managing that speed to learning process.
That's a very, so that was my question. So that's a very thorough and very good answer. Appreciate it. I guess my takeaway also is, it doesn't matter. You can be actually pretty big size wise, but still figure out how to make it less bureaucratic and less cumbersome if there is a will. And the opposite is true too. You can be, you know,
Yeah.
from a get-go, you can inherit some very bad traits and build bureaucracy out of nothing just because you're copycating off of. Yeah, thank you. There's another question for you. So is there a time where many organizations are hesitant to make big changes, in brackets, in an effort to control what they can control? What are some effective ways to address leadership about a shift in organizational structure or culture when they aren't willing to make uncomfortable concessions?
Yeah. So when I work with clients, I'm pretty devoted on taking on projects that I think will be successful for me and for the client, or for the client, and then by extension me. And so I tend to shy away from the folks who are just not willing to face reality, who really want to dwell in magical or wishful thinking, that they can just say it's not happening and pretend like, you know, there's nothing different. So, I mean, that's that's my strategy. And I have gone into clients where I thought that was true and discovered later that it wasn't, and then fired those clients. So I only have so much time to give, and so I only want to work with those folks that I think are going to that are either currently in that state of being learners, knowing that there's more that they need to learn, more new things that they need to adopt, or are, you know, have good potential for sort of shifting into that mode. Um, I don't have time to try to save a dinosaur. It's just not. I'm just. Sometimes people call me a visionary pragmatist, right? I'm very practical about these things. Can I really make a difference here? And so, and I know, you know, I have a privileged position because I'm not an internal anywhere. I'm not already stuck in an organization. But if I were, I would be looking around in that organization to find who else here is my ally or accomplice in helping this become a learning organization. How can we band together? How can we do things differently? I was just talking to somebody this morning about how the manager, he's coaching a bunch of teams, and he's talking about the managers there are just not willing to give these teams what they need to be successful. And I said, well, have you talked to their boss? You know, because sometimes if their boss is the one who is the learner, they can influence those folks. It's like, where are the streams of influence in this organization? And otherwise, you just have to settle for the small wins. You have to settle for helping the team create the most comfortable environment they can to accomplish things the best they can, knowing that they are not going to ever become a great team because the organization isn't going to enable them for that. Some people are willing to settle for that. That's kind of my plan Z. My plan of last resort is to go there. I really want to see people be more successful in reaching their goals. So yeah, I look for those opportunities. And there are plenty of folks out there that will take the money from the big organizations and help them spend their money and not get anywhere. I don't need to be one of those people.
It sounds like you need to know when to push back from the table, right?
Yeah,
You don't want to.
exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for that one.
Yeah.
So Diana, I think folks, we got T-5 before
Yeah.
we wrap. So
Yeah.
let us know if you have maybe another question. If you want to throw in a hopper before we
I
start.
just want to say thank you, Dan. I think the last statement was the most powerful. The
Oh, thank you,
willingness to
Mercy.
walk away, the willingness to just know this is not going anywhere. So don't just waste your time, because
Yeah.
we don't know people don't know the boundaries or to set boundaries for themselves. And you take on so much, it's
Yeah.
not going to yield any results and you've burned out.
Yeah.
That was very powerful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Diana, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Could you tell me, is your work somehow based on Deborah Ancora's work? Are you familiar with her? She's from MIT Sloan School of Business, and she has an X-team theory that is very successfully implemented.
Yeah. No, there are a lot of folks. My work is a blend of all the giants whose shoulders I stand on, right? So so there are a lot of folks who are working in this direction of examining, how to help groups of people, how to help teams of people improve, how to create more humane workspaces, how to help good businesses be more successful at what they do. And so I do kind of track as many of those as I'm aware of the X theory. I haven't done a deep study about it yet. I mean, I'm still trying to really integrate team topologies because I think there's a lot of new great ideas there. And, so as long as we're all on the same path and on parallel paths moving toward that future of a better world of work, I'm I'm supportive.
Right. Folks, anything else? We still got 3 minutes before we have to wrap.
Well, if while we're waiting for one last question, I would really love to encourage any of you to come check us out at agilefluency.org. Check out our workshops and events page. Read some of our other pages. We've got blog posts there. We've got a video that's about the model that you can watch that's free. There's a free downloadable ebook. You can ask us for that graphic. We are a lot about giving as much away as we can, and so when people become licensed facilitators with us, we then continue to give them even more. So Jim and I have been on a couple of webinars that we do that are specific for the people who are licensed facilitators, for instance, and we can keep doing those in an ongoing way so that we can share. We're involved in speed to learning too. We want to be able to share across our network all the things that we learned. So yeah, please come and check us out. And if you want to know more, we often set up half-hour Zoom calls to just talk about stuff, answer questions with folks. So, stay in touch.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, Jim. How you doing?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is your first name Learntor or Mercy?
My business name is Lentor. My first
okay. I love that. I
know, right?
Learn. Yes. Thank you, everyone. It's such a pleasure to spend this time with you.
Well, thank you indeed, folks. If there are no more questions, and we are almost at the hour, would like to thank everyone. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Diana for making making this possible. Thanks for finding the time for us. This is the second one. People are giving thumbs up and doing virtual clapping. I need to do this. So thank you again for coming out and doing this. Everyone, thank you for joining and making this also a live event. We shall be wrapping the recording as soon as we finish, and hopefully it's shortly thereafter we're going to post it. I'm going to make it available to everyone. And Diana, your assets are also going to be posted there. I'm going to put a link to the influence,
Great.
Fluency,
Yeah.
Fluency.org.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. I mean,
Mhm.
people can reach out to you directly. Hopefully they will. And hopefully maybe we can have you back at some later point in time.
Yeah.
And hopefully the community is going to also grow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Thank you all for joining and contributing.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. Hi, Jim. How you doing?
Appreciate it. My pleasure.
Hey, Ben. Ben already left. Yeah.
Arrivederci.
Mm.
Cheers.